Inside Boston's Museum of Fine Arts is a modest room in the American collection listed as Gallery 223. In it are 16 works by artists defined as the Boston School, a group working in the late 19th and early 20th centuries who favored Vermeer-like light and Impressionism. The subjects of most pieces in Gallery 223 are still lives and attractive women doing quiet things, sharing thoughts on a new necklace, assuaging hurt feelings, in reverie. But beyond the creamy nude and marble nymph is a work with a different energy. A self-portrait by artist Ellen Day Hale, created for submission to the Paris Salon of 1885. Hale had been studying painting for over 10 years by then, including with the revered Boston instructor William Morris Hunt. She had painted her first female nude at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and she had left her Boston home for Europe to study in the atelier of Carolus Duran, who was John Singer Sargent's beloved mentor. Sargent painted this portrait of his teacher 2 years before Hale arrived. Hale studied briefly at the Royal Academy of Art in London and finally at the Académie Julienne. The 1883 Paris Salon had already accepted one of her works, an artistic milestone that almost guaranteed a successful career in America. But also in 1883, Hale returned to the United States because of illness. It was then that she began working in her family's homes in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and Matunic, Rhode Island, on her self-portrait. Describing the work in progress, Hale wrote to her mother, "It is certainly original but queer enough, and frightfully difficult business." Matunic, Rhode Island, September 21st, 1884. She was 30 years old. Born not quite 75 years after the American Revolution, her family still spoke fondly of Nathan Hale, a direct ancestor and Revolutionary War hero. She was just 10 years old when the Civil War ended. Her father, the writer and Unitarian minister, Edward Everett Hale, had been a headlining figure in the anti-slavery movement. In 1903, he would become chaplain to the United States Senate. But returning to 1885, so many women were flocking to Paris to study art that painter May Alcott Neiricher, Louisa May Alcott's sister, published a guide entitled Studying Art Abroad and How to Do It Cheaply, intended specifically for the female student. Also at this point, the height of the Gilded Age, Ellen Day Hale had met the woman who would become her lifelong companion. Gabrielle Clemens, an American artist from Philadelphia, also attending the Académie Julienne. In a letter to her father, Hale wrote, "The principal happiness outside of my work which I have at present is my new friendship with Gabrielle, which is a great deal to me now, and which is likely to be more." Paris, June 15th, 1885. Hale had returned to the Académie Julienne with her completed self-portrait. She needed her instructors, Julienne and Bouguereau, the most famous artists in Paris at the time, to approve her work for entry to that year's salon. Reporting in a letter to her mother on this very important critique, which Gabrielle Clemens also attended, Hale wrote, "Bouguereau asked me, among other things, why I had got my fan so big. Said it detracted from my head and that the background came forward too much. Then he attacked my hand, told me I ought to have made it prettier." "But they aren't pretty, really," said I. "They're prettier than that," said he, suppressed laughter being heard from Gabrielle and Monsieur Julien. Paris, March 1st, 1885. Rodolphe Julien was extremely fond of Hale. Hale wrote to her mother about this instructor after the critique. He went on about my needing some drawing and how it was the thing that I did need, and said he wished I would draw a woman's hand and wrist from the plaster, a request he made with apparent diffidence, and which has been the occasion of endless jeering from Gabrielle and Miss Trotter ever since. But I don't care, I'm going to do it. Paris, April 26, 1885. 130 years later, art critic Sebastian Smee would write in the Boston Globe, "There's blood in that pale, sinewy hand, blood and resolve. Idle for now, it won't stay that way for long. It's poised for action." But where does a 30-year-old single woman, certainly gay, in 1885 source the attitude for that lifted chin? This was the age of the new woman, and women were seriously studying art in record numbers. But art historian Tracy Fitzpatrick says that it was still rare for a woman to represent herself as Hale did, looking resolutely out at the viewer without any tools identifying herself as an artist. Erica Hirschler from Boston's Museum of Fine Arts speculates that for her composition, Hale borrowed the horizontal plane and fabric background from this portrait, on view in that 1883 Paris Salon of Hale's classmate Dora Wheeler by William Merritt Chase. Edouard Manet was certainly an influence. He had started a revolution in painting with the confrontational sense of his work and the raw immediacy of his brushstroke. Critics recognize these qualities as integral elements in the Hale self-portrait. But Hale's own family may hold some answers to the question of spirit. This is Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, which unified the North against slavery and jump-started the American Civil War. Harriet Beecher Stowe was Ellen Day Hale's great aunt. Catherine Beecher, another great aunt, wrote popular books and founded 2 female schools based on her theory that women were uniquely suited to be educators. And the third sister, suffragette Isabella Beecher Hooker, campaigned alongside Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony for women's voting rights. And she also helped draft a bill passed in the Connecticut legislature, giving married women equal property rights as their husbands. Of the 4 Beecher sisters, only Ellen's grandmother, Mary Beecher Perkins, was not an activist. But they all lived well into Ellen Day Hale's midlife and were certainly models of courage and principle for her. Ellen's own letters and family stories describe an intensely hardworking woman whose very bones seem stitched together with kindness and modesty. She was the eldest child and only daughter of that famous minister and his wife, Emily Perkins Hale. Many brothers came after her. 8 altogether. Her parents adored her, and her father was a great defender of the arts. In a letter endorsing a fund for Boston artists, Edward Everett Hale wrote, "We have none too many artists, and it is hoped that no one may be obliged to leave us." Edward to his son Philip, 1905. He supported Ellen financially and wholeheartedly, but there was also an expectation that she, as the eldest and only daughter, would always be there for her family. Another famous relative, Ellen Day Hale's first cousin, was Charlotte Perkins Gilman, author of The Yellow Wallpaper, which is regarded as an important work of feminist literature. Perkins framed the essential generosity Hale extended to her family in this letter. My very dear cousin, there was so much to say of my lovely memories of you when I was 15, 16, 17. You were so kind, and you were so heavenly kind to all the brothers. I remember you reading Lane's Arabian Nights to that blessed little Robbie. You certainly raised a family and took care of mother and father and everyone else within reach. Even Hale's early instructor, William Morris Hunt, noted her sense of duty and encouraged her to have more of the happiness that belongs to youth. The charged gaze in Hale's self-portrait is this painting's power. But that resolute boldness does not align with the sense of responsibility we hear in Ellen's many letters. Working on her self-portrait in Matunic, Hale worried that she was not in Roxbury with her mother and the boys. I feel very mean, she said, to stay away so long, but I can't bear to leave such a piece of work undone. Matunic, Rhode Island, September 21st, 1884. Recorded in a letter from Paris, she told Julienne, "Now I have only to think of caring for myself, but in a few years I shall have to think of doing something for the family." Paris, April 26th, 1885. And yet, one detail in one letter might help explain that edge of defiance in the lift of her self-portrait chin. Recovered from her 1883 illness and back in Paris, Ellen reported to her mother, "I am very well indeed. Mrs. Green says remarkably so. Anyhow, I have plenty of color and am not yellow with a red note as of old. My hair is growing finely, and I am wearing it atop my head à la Française, and it's all my own, too." Paris, April 26, 1885. Hale seems to have been unwell in 1883 with something that caused jaundice and hair loss, perhaps a viral process and stress. By 1883, she had also met Gabrielle Clemens. She drew this portrait of Clemens that year. So, along with being sick, Hale must have been addressing her feelings and perhaps stressed by what they meant for her future in society. Historian Tracy Fitzpatrick believes that Hale had used this photo, taken in 1884, as a resource for her self-portrait. It is beautiful but haunting, and clearly reflects her thinned hair and the deep-set eyes of someone who may have been ill. Here is a note on 19th century hairstyles. Bangs very specifically symbolized a modern woman, even a rebellious one. Given the reference in her 1884 letter to being proud that she now has her own hair, Hale probably posed for the portrait, in which she sports a healthy shock of bangs in a wig, which perhaps provided her with the courage to try on the happiness that belongs to youth, as William Morris Hunt had said, to channel those great aunts, to rebel. Before the self-portrait, Hale confessed to a friend, "I don't think I shall ever do anything very astonishing, but I shall be to blame if I don't express in fairly good and comprehensible language something which no one else has happened to express before." The unique energy in the corner of Gallery 223 at the Museum of Fine Arts testifies to her success. Bouguereau ultimately rejected the self-portrait for the Salon, but accepted this portrait of a man named Fulham, entitled L'Hiver en Amérique. Her delighted father wrote to Ellen's brother Philip, "Nellie is to be in the Salon after all." Julienne advised her to show her little Fulham by the window, and she did, and it is in and has a number, whatever that means, and is to hang in the line. Boston, Massachusetts, April 10th, 1885. Hale established herself as a significant artist of the time, as did Clemens, who had studied etching with the esteemed Stephen Parrish and taught Ellen the medium. Both women showed brilliance in the etching realm, but Hale also gravitated to Impressionism, even painting in Giverny with her brother, Philip, who was also an artist. In 1893, the two women moved to a summer home of their own called The Thickets on Folly Cove, part of the Lanesville section of Gloucester, Massachusetts. For a regular income, Hale and Clemens painted murals for church decoration and printed etchings at The Thickets. But Nellie and Gabby, as they were known, also became leaders of sorts in the growing Cape Ann art community. Teresa Bernstein and her husband William Meyerowitz stayed with the women in Folly Cove and learned to etch with them. The sculptor Walker Hancock wrote in his autobiography, "Folly Cove had begun to attract artists at least 2 generations before I arrived. The first to settle there were Ellen Day Hale and Gabrielle Clemens. They were responsible for sculptor Charles Grafley's buying a house and building a large studio nearby, having recommended the Folly to him as a healthful place in which to live." The Thickets became a beloved retreat for family, for Edward Everett Hale to escape the dramas of Washington, D.C., for artists Lillian Westcott Hale and Philip Hale to bring their daughter Nancy, and for visits from Ellen's beloved brothers. Edward Everett Hale, true to his warm character, even created a Cape Ann alphabet. Ann Cape, near Mr. Bates, at Miss Clements, below Dog Common, Essex County, Folly Cove, Gloucester. Hale, L&D, inn kept by Gabrielle, near Lanesville, Massachusetts, nowhere, but opposite place called queerly Rockport, once Sandy Beach, Tragabigzanda, United States. After her father's death in 1909, Ellen built a stone art studio she named Howlett's beside The Thickets. Ellen Day Hale died in 1940, and this studio was passed to her sister-in-law, Lillian Westcott Hale, and then to her niece, Nancy, a writer. In 1969, the New York Times reviewed Nancy Hale's The Life in the Studio, a memoir about growing up among all these artists. In the photograph for that story, Nancy Hale is seated in Howlett's. The studio is filled with Hale family art, but over Nancy's right shoulder hangs Ellen Day Hale's self-portrait, issuing all that unequivocal confidence to Folly Cove friends and artists, until it was delivered to Boston's Museum of Fine Arts in 1986.